Slayer returns.
This witch is casting horrible and disfiguring spells so that she can become a cheerleader.
She warned me that something was coming.
She finds out I've been here, she'll kill me.
We don't have a minute.
Oh, God. How much time do we have?
Take her!
The Slayer returns in an all-new Buffy the Vampire Slayer next week.
Witchy woman, see how high she flies.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer Season 1 Episode 3, Witch, written by Dana Reston and directed by Stephen Cragg, deals with the first non-vampire enemy, a gremlin. No, obviously, a witch. Joss wanted it to be very clear early on that the story was not just Buffy fighting vampires, which would conceivably be boring, and he wanted to establish that the Scoobies would be facing all sorts of supernatural evil.
Werewolves, incubi, succubi, everything you've ever dreaded was under your bed but told yourself couldn't be by the light of day.
Though following the popularity of shows like True Blood, he has indicated that he could have been mistaken. It also seems useful to me that he would follow up 2 evil patriarchal Master and Luke episodes with 2 episodes that feature evil women, which establishes that his feminism allows for accepting that some women are just plain bad. Some feminist writers try to counteract existing sexism by being prejudiced the other way and depicting all women as good and men as all or mostly bad, but Joss takes a more realistic approach and allows for feminine evil. I am fine with this episode having a female villain, but I really have a problem with the evil witch trope. It's derived from real-world Christian imperialism and misogyny. Basically, Europe had always had people who claimed the ability to exercise magic, and they were originally accepted simply as powerful people. If you used your magic for evil, you would be considered a criminal, but if you were just a healer or helped people's crops grow, you would be respected as a shaman. The Christians who took over Europe had some violent conflicts with witches, who were seen as devil worshippers, because any power to manipulate the world past natural forces that wasn't God would naturally be Satan. After a war between the Catholic Church and the Cather sect, which involved propaganda on both sides about the devil having an active presence on Earth and the other side being devil worshippers, an atmosphere came about that was very similar to that of Nazi Germany. Christians began to fear anyone strange and started imagining people as literal demons trying to hurt them. Conspiracy theories about other religions being evil cults controlling the world were then taken very seriously. Then came the witch hunts, in which hundreds of thousands of people were brutally killed as witches. In 1486, German friar Heinrich Kramer published the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of the Witches, a book that was the 15th century version of a chick tract, basically a pamphlet to inform people on the dangers of witches and how to stop them. The book is pretty much just wild ravings of anti-feminist fears of women having power. It says women are power-hungry and susceptible to corruption from Satan, and that they would use their devil-given powers to eat children and emasculate men. Just as modern anti-feminists are obsessed with the idea that feminists want to cut off men's testicles with scissors, Kramer asserted that women in Europe sought power so that they could literally magic men's penises off their bodies. Yes, he actually said this. And then he goes into detail about how these penises are then magicked into pets that are kept in boxes and fed this, he goes into detail. And then people bought this sick, twisted nonsense, and it inspired men to oppress women and carry out witch hunts. The modern view of witches as women who try to hurt children and eat people stems mostly from Kramer's absurd misogynistic ramblings. So when fictional witches are presented in this manner, as evil women by definition, it seems to me like old misogyny. It may be a fun villain, I loved Hocus Pocus, but it comes from this bad ideology that still persists to some extent, and shouldn't be promoted. It's comparable to the blood libel myth about evil Jews kidnapping good Christian children to drink their blood in secret rituals on Jewish holidays. It's paranoid anti-Semitic nonsense that does real harm, and I think most Americans can recognize why it's so problematic that blood libel is still used as a plotline in some films from countries like Lebanon. The Holocaust is on people's minds when they hear about that kind of anti-Semitism, and they regard the blood libel plotline as a sign of real evil existing today. Yet the evil witch remains a beloved villain, regardless of the massacres against witches and existing prejudice against people who call themselves witches, who are still associated with an evil cult of devil worshippers that never actually existed. Even if not meant literally, the label of witch is often used to disrespect female politicians, meaning an evil woman who tries to take control and must be stopped. The figure of the evil witch, as derived from paranoid European superstition, is inherently problematic. Unless witches are depicted as just people with power who can use their magic for either good or evil, as with later Buffy. A lot of Buffy Season 1 is strange compared to the rest of the show. I think Joss just didn't know what to do with the show, and he used the first season to figure out what does and doesn't work. When blaming Joss for perpetuating the evil witch trope, I'm restricting my criticism to this one episode. Witchcraft is treated much more neutrally as early as Season 2. Some might argue as early as Season 1, Episode 8, I Robot You Jane, if we decide to count what Giles and Ms. Calendar do as witchcraft. It's not clear to me if we should. And the nature of the paranoid witch hunt is dealt with rather brilliantly in Season 3, Episode 11, Gingerbread. Which is an anomaly, but an anomaly that deserves to be criticized for its use of the problematic figure. All this said, I'm fairly certain Joss Whedon apologized for this episode through Xander in Season 6, Episode 7, Once More with Feeling.
It could be witches, some evil witches, which is ridiculous because witches, they were persecuted, wicked, good, and love the earth and women power, and I'll be over here.
Witch is an episode with a twist, which means that many things can be interpreted two different ways. I'll be summarizing the plot based on how someone first watching the show would interpret things, and analyze based on these assumptions. And after reaching the twist portion of the plot, I'll go back over other details. It starts with Giles ranting at Buffy for ignoring her sacred birthright to enslave herself to a cult, meaning that she wants to be a cheerleader.
Can you say overreaction?
This is a continuation of the theme that Buffy wants to be a normal girl more than be the Slayer. She's willing to protect the world from vampires, but she also wants to retire from that life as much as she can. This conflict will go on through most of the high school years. Giles is an authoritarian old teacher who doesn't know how to handle the current generation. He expects prompt obedience, and when he doesn't get it, he has no idea what to do. They both need time to get to know each other, trust each other, and make allowances for each other. Giles is Buffy's father figure in her biological father's absence. As such, I think Giles represents dated authoritarianism of fatherhood that needs to evolve into a more practical advisory but not necessarily leadership role, as part of an episode-wide theme about parent-teenager relationships. Though the Watchers' Council will eventually represent an evil, oppressive, patriarchal force, that theme seems absent from early Buffy, and we're instead just looking at a confused father figure. Some feminists take his dismissive attitudes towards cheerleading as sexist, but it's more that he's grounded in book culture, not sports culture. He has the same disdain for monster trucks in Season 2, Episode 7, Lie to Me. Giles is also based on Merrick, who would have shown disdain for football in the movie's original screenplay. Meanwhile, there's an evil witch stirring a bubbling cauldron.
A cauldron? Who uses a cauldron anymore?
The witch grabs a doll. Something commendable about the episode's depiction of witches is that it properly uses the European poppet legend about witches hurting people by making dolls that resemble them and then doing stuff to the dolls, which would then magically affect them in real life. Due to American slavery demonizing the religions of the enslaved Africans, American media often depicts the poppet legend as the voodoo doll, as part of an overall negative depiction of the Vodun religion, characterizing it as evil magic, as with So Weird.
She comes from the islands. She can put a voodoo curse on you. What sort of curse? Anything she wants. Voodoo is very, very powerful.
So I give it points for not letting Vodun imagery sneak in there. Which is more or less like praising Spike for not feeding on bleeding disaster victims. They shouldn't have to be praised for not doing something that they shouldn't do anyway, but it's so rare that it happens that I think it's worth saying something. Back at Sunnydale High, cheerleader tryouts are underway. Buffy comes in, along with Willow and Xander to give support. Xander ogles a girl stretching, and if this were any other show, I would probably complain about the objectification of girls' bodies and the pandering to the male gaze, except that Buffy has far more pandering to the female gaze overall, with shirtless hunky guys in as early as Season 1, Episode 7, Angel.
Ooh, hello, salty goodness.
Pandering to the male gaze is rather anomalous. It may be worth considering that the male gaze shots, including those of Miss French in the following episode, Season 1, Episode 4, Teacher's Pet, could have been placed in the earlier episodes to acquire a male viewership, as Buffy is a predominantly female-oriented show, after which they would presumably stay for good writing and not require that kind of sexual pandering. Xander awkwardly tries to flirt with Buffy through getting her a bracelet made for a romantic partner, and then denying any romantic intention, which is kind of stalkery gaslighting, but Buffy remains comedically oblivious. I don't know. Xander turns into a big jackass in his attraction to Buffy in Season 1, Episode 5, Never Kill a Boy on the First Date, but I think Witch is mostly clean of Xander's jackassery. Cordelia rants about how another girl, Amber, is supposedly acting pretentious, when of course Cordelia is acting that way herself. Willow dryly mocks her, which, along with the scene in the Harvest where Willow tricks Cordelia into deleting her homework, shows how much Buffy has improved her self-esteem.
Self-esteem is for everybody. Yeah. Self-esteem is for everyone.
As Amber auditions, intimidating Buffy, Willow waves over her friend Amy, who since Willow last saw her has lost a lot of weight so that she can join the cheerleading squad. Amy talks about how her mom, Catherine, coaches her, training 6 hours a day. Buffy can't imagine spending that much time with her mom, but Amy says Catherine is great, and then Amber spontaneously combusts.
The flames are lovely.
Buffy leaps into action and puts out the flames. I like how useful she is in an emergency situation. She's not just someone who slays vampires. She's a hero figure. Back at the library, Buffy takes an active role in identifying the threat. Giles has his years of research, but Buffy asks him the right questions to draw on that knowledge. Buffy is not always good with school, and she has priorities that adults don't respect, but she's not stupid. Buffy, Giles, and Xander come up with the theory that Amber has some kind of uncontrollable fire-starting power, and Buffy indicates that the next step is to research Amber's history. Xander and Willow leap to help. Buffy again tries to bear the burden of patrolling the Hellmouth alone, but Willow and Xander assert themselves, and she relents, accepting Willow and Xander as her Slayerettes. The idea of the Slayer as a solitary figure is repeated again and again as the only way that Slayers and Watchers have ever conceived of the Slayer working out. And the reason why Buffy turns out to be the most successful Slayer is because she surrounds herself with family and friends to help her bear the load.
A Slayer with family and friends. That sure as hell wasn't in the brochure.
It can be thought of as Buffy moving away from simply being a masculine hero figure turned feminine, and more embracing feminine ideas about community, which is largely regarded as feminist. Back at the Summers house, Joyce struggles with opening packages she's acquired as part of her job at an art gallery. Buffy tries to talk about the day's events, but Joyce isn't really paying attention. Buffy brings up Catherine training with Amy, now jealous, but as a single working mother, Joyce can't realistically do anything like that. Joyce also annoys her by indicating that Buffy is a delinquent, and Buffy can't really explain why that's not true, causing a general conflict between them. Joyce struggling to open the package, even though she makes no progress, does strike me as a feminist image, because she's being so serious with the physical activity. Buffy opening it like it's nothing is more or less just a joke about her having powers, similar to Superman jokes, not gender role subversion, though that is also present. Joyce starts to pull out a statue and quickly puts it back when she realizes that it's a fertility god, implied to be visibly erect. Dialogue from Season 6, Episode 11, Gone, suggests that the statue depicts Kokopelli, that Native American flute-playing deity, often seen in stylized form without a visible erection, but more properly is depicted with an erection.
Kokopelli?
After Joyce leaves, Buffy sneaks a peek. That frank depiction of female sexuality puts Xander's lust in perspective, and balances out his ogling the cheerleaders.
Oh, and balance? Very, very important.
Oh!